Hi, I'm Gerald Veasley, and I am so happy to be here with you on Alternative Venues for Jazz. We have to start off by saying thank you to Gail Boyd for her vision in creating this platform for musicians to talk about their work and to talk about one another, to encourage one another. And I'm really grateful to be here. A little bit about myself. I am a jazz bassist. I'm also an educator and have morphed into this role of an arts leader as well, and lead a couple different organizations. One is Jazz Philadelphia, which is really an exciting organization here in my hometown of Philadelphia, where we create programming to provide support to individuals and organizations to help amplify their work. The latest kind of visual example of that was the third annual Jazz Philadelphia Summit. Thank you to Gail Boyd for participating. But we provide a lot of content knowledge and discovery and opportunities for connection over a 2-day period with all kinds of great speakers this year. We had folks like Christian McBride and Jasmine Horn, Vijay Iyer, and a lot of great folks, including Gail Boyd and others in the industry, talking about, how to deal with the challenges that we're all facing, whether it's the pandemic or how do we respond to social justice. So that's a lot of the work that I've been doing for the last 2.5 years, in addition to performing. And the way I got into an interest in jazz is growing up in Philadelphia. I almost took for granted that everybody loved jazz because the radio station that we have and had at that time, WRTI, seemed like in my neighborhood it was always on everyone's radio station. I can remember so clearly being a kid, and what would happen on Saturdays is that the men and women who owned cars on the block, they would wash their cars at the same time, and everybody would have on this wonderful jazz radio station, WRTI. I love this music, hearing it as a young person. I started off playing music as a 12-year-old who got a bass for Christmas with the understanding that if I was going to do this, my family said, you have to take it really, really seriously, and enrolled me in lessons, and I just ate it all up. I loved music with a passion. Practice was never a burden. But there was something interesting about hearing jazz, and there were jazz records in the house where I grew up. Ornette Coleman, Wes Montgomery, a wide range, Jimmy Smith, a wide-ranging taste in jazz, and I just loved all of it. And I continued to grow and learn in playing classical guitar a little bit, playing in bands. From the time I was 13, I had bands, and we'd play parties and play little clubs. And eventually I got to the point where I was thinking about being a professional musician, but it seemed like something that was so mysterious. Like, how do you become a professional? So I decided when I graduated from high school to do something more serious. And I enrolled at the University of Pennsylvania studying political science with the goal of being a lawyer. They were part of my reason for doing that, as I was thinking that, seeing how musicians struggled, I thought, well, maybe I could be helpful. Maybe I could be an entertainment lawyer. And in my third year of my studies there, my father passed away. And it was so unexpected that I went into this deep grieving process. It was really difficult for me to figure out who I was and to cope with his death. And all the time when I was in college, I had really put music aside. And after going in the midst of this grieving process, the only thing that kind of made sense to me was listening to music. All of a sudden, music now, instead of just being a fun thing or something that made me feel good, it felt really healing. And as I was getting this healing, I had this aha moment about, well, wait a minute, there's another way that you can serve. If music does this much for people, imagine what it would be like if you were one of the ones who provided this something very helpful to people. And that's when I decided to become a professional musician, and had a lot of great opportunities along the way. There's a band here back in those days called Reverie, which was an interesting band because we called ourselves an electric jazz band because we didn't think of ourselves as fusion, even though we played electric instruments. We thought of it as jazz because it had improvisation, it had surprise, it had daring, it had a concern for what would happen in the moment. And we play anything from Dexter Gordon to Weather Report. Our interests are pretty broad. And it also gave me a taste of actually not only performing music, but writing music. The importance of that situation was that it also gave me an opportunity to get in front of people in Philadelphia who would later become my mentors, who were really folks who were the lifeblood of the music here in Philadelphia. People like Monette Sutherland, the great guitarist, John Blake, the jazz violinist, and Odine Pope, the wonderful saxophonist. A word about Odine, he became my mentor, and still to this day I think of him as a mentor, who was somebody who embraced me. And as a result of working with those people, I came to the attention of McCoy Tyner, of Joe Zawinul from Weather Report, and his band, the Zawinul Syndicate. I toured with him for about 7.5 years and learned a great deal from him about music and life. And one of the highlights of my career was touring with the late Grover Washington Jr., where I recorded with him, wrote songs for him, and was part of his band as well. Then I had the good fortune of having my own recording career. Recorded 9 CDs for a label called Heads Up, which is part of Concord. And there I got a chance to kind of soar in a whole different way. So that's a kind of brings you kind of up to date with the things I've been doing. And I'm grateful for all those opportunities. And now I'm embarking on a project with a wonderful singer. Her name is Carol Riddick. She is a phenomenal singer. And what I love most about her is not just her voice and her sound, but her emotional commitment to the music, to anything she sings. And what music we've chosen for her to be committed to is the music of the great Nina Simone, which in studying Nina's music, Miss Simone's music, we've really just discovered so much depth in her music. The subject matter, whether it's her love songs or her social justice songs or her songs about identity, you can hear a person who is really standing up to a society that would marginalize her, someone who's claiming their right to be a creative person, to be a Black woman in a society that doesn't often value the contributions of Black women. So we delve into that music, and we also delve into the vulnerability that her music presents, and also the hope that her music presents, because it was, even though she embodied this rage and this fury and this outrage about social injustice, there's also, we found parts of optimism. I wish I knew how it feels to be free, for example. The fact that she covered the Beatles song, Here Comes the Sun. So that's the project that I'm engaged in right now creatively with Carol Riddick, the music of Nina Simone. Really, really excited to be involved in that. In passing, I mentioned one of my mentors, Odine Pope. So I know many other musicians here have mentors or have things that, we always have these kind of road stories or things that we connect to each other on various levels. For me, one of the things I learned most from Odine, who, by the way, if you don't know his work, Odine Pope is just an amazing saxophonist who was one of the younger contemporaries of John Coltrane, and he also was prominent in Max Roach's quartet, formed with him for a number of years. But as a saxophonist, in terms of technique and style, he's really one of the leading voices on the tenor saxophone, especially. And I toured with him as part of a trio, bass, drums, and saxophone, for a number of years. And also he has a saxophone choir, which is really an intriguing project with 9 saxophones in a rhythm section. Just amazingly creative person. And I can remember this one moment in working with him, and, I always, playing this music that was very demanding, but at the same time, it had a lot of freedom into it, and a lot of freedom of opportunity for freedom of expression, and music that was bold, but also required you as a soloist to dig deep and find that thing that you never said before. And I can remember this one performance, man, where I was really struggling. And when you're playing and things aren't quite clicking, and you're doing it in front of an audience, it can be really a head trip, because the thing that sometimes is easy in that moment feels difficult. And so not only you have this desire to make music and for it to be effortless and to get out of the way, you also can have this inner conversation about what's not happening. And I remember talking to Odine about it and saying, many musicians can relate to this. said, man, I just couldn't get anything happening. I just felt like I was struggling. And he said to me, well, the thing to do is to stay with it, because even when it's not happening, it will happen. And I thought that was really something that only a sage like that, someone who really had been through that process and who had developed the confidence in himself, but also in the process of trusting, that cliche of trusting the process, but really doing that, of knowing that what's been poured into you and the work that you've done, both on the bandstand and especially off the bandstand, that it will yield fruit. But you have to be be comfortable in that discomfort of knowing that when it's not happening, that it will happen. And now these days, I feel like it's a metaphor for life too, right? I mean, we're living in a pandemic where we're being called upon to be trustful of something that we've never experienced before, where we're seeing people around us whose very lives and livelihoods are being threatened. And at the same time, we have to trust that there will be an explanation or a better day or a pathway, even though we can't see it, that there's something else better in store of us, that we can reclaim some things that we've lost, and that we can find something to make us even stronger. And that's in the midst of not seeing evidence, right? But just knowing that if it's not happening now, it will happen. So I've been grateful to have mentors like that, and seeing people like, I have to mention real quickly, folks like Joe Zawinul, who, grew up, came of age during World War II, growing up in a little village outside of Vienna. And then his main desire as this brilliant young musician, his main desire in life was to be able to come to the United States and interact with these great Black musicians that he heard on the radio, that he would be able to see a Duke Ellington, that he would meet a Louis Armstrong. This was his dream. And to be able to fulfill that dream, and growing up in a village that was, throughout World War II, was bombed. And you talk about your life being threatened or your livelihood being threatened. This is a man that lived through really life or death circumstances. So when he came here and was able to work with Maynard Ferguson, who was one of the ones who brought him here, and the great Dinah Washington, and being a part of the wonderful Cannonball Adderley group, and really coming of age and living his dream of being in the United States, but mostly of playing this wonderful music with his heroes, that any other difficulty he faced, it was not something to be, make him cower, or to make him afraid, or to make him shrink from how difficult it might be. So in Zawinul's band, we had this running joke, and the running joke was, it's good to be. It's good to be, because no matter what the circumstances, Joe would turn it around, and the thing that we would think would be difficult or challenging or annoying or irritating or infuriating, he would say, well, it's good to be. So an example might be, we're enjoying a great day on the road in Europe, and all of a sudden it starts to rain and we get soaked. His position would be, it's good to be caught in the rain. It's good to be soaked. It's good to be dripping in rain, and it's good to be, cold and shivering, because it makes you tougher. Or it's good that the instruments aren't working properly, because it makes you more creative. So no matter what the circumstances, he always had this attitude of the difficulty of it was building us up. That's the Zawinul story. What I learned from Grover Washington Jr. is how, being a musician, even though it's this wonderful thing, and it's a wonderful privilege, that there's more to life than music. What I saw in this man was someone who even in our world, let's be honest, he was a star, but he always had this humility about him, or this, maybe humility is the wrong word, because he also did have this sense of pride in his work, but he had this differentiation between taking himself seriously and taking the music seriously, right? It's an important distinction. He was very clear on taking music with the utmost seriousness, but of himself, not so much, of being willing to be humble about who he was, and having a love for everyone, and being considerate and kind to people, and putting family first. Like, in spite of how being on the road is great, and touring and the crowds and the applause and the gold records, that all of that pales in comparison to the enduring value of family. So I've been blessed, really, to have these kind of mentors. And I still have one more. And now that we're talking about mentors, I got to say this. Shout out to the great Bill Cole, who's a wonderful instrumentalist who has dedicated his life to being an ethnomusicologist and showing Western music, how important music is from all around the world, and mastering the didgeridoo and the Sinai and the Kona and all these wonderful, interesting reeds from Asia. When I talked to him about the pandemic that we're going through right now, and what's required of a musician, he said, well, this is a time for musicians to be silent. So what do you mean by that? Because all of us, we have taken, what's been taken away from us is this ability to perform publicly, so as in the way that we're used to, and to make music and to make sound and to touch people and reach people. He said, this is an opportunity for musicians to be silent. And what he means is that in this silence, now we can recharge. We can find something else to draw from, to make our music even more powerful, impactful, and richer when we're able to perform again. That this, he didn't use the word reset, but maybe that's a way to think of it too. That we can now have this reset where we're in an incubation period of digging deeper and finding more stories in our music to share with the world. So I thought that was powerful. And that's not me, that's Bill Cole, the great Bill Cole. So I thought I'd share that with you. In terms of how I'm dealing with the pandemic, for me, I think what's critical is to have an opportunity to see if I can be a help to artists, to musicians, to find ways both to help my family, but to also help my larger family of creatives. Here in Philadelphia, we had a situation where the city government, city administration, in looking at how the revenues have been cut so drastically, decided that they would cut the arts. And when I say cut the arts, I mean eliminate the Office of Arts, Culture, and the Creative Economy, to zero out the budget. So I was one of many voices in our city saying that no, this is unacceptable, that the arts are worth more than zero, that the people who are involved in dance and visual arts and theater and music, that the work that we are all doing is worth more than zero. See, it would have been one thing to say we're going to cut, like some other departments may have been cut 10% or 20%, but to say you're going to zero out all of the funding for the arts, I found it to be an affront to who we are. And so again, I was one of the many voices to testify before City Council and to be part of a campaign, an organization. Credit to Aaliyah Duncan, who created this organization called Philly Culture United, that did a major campaign along with other organizations to restore some of the budget cuts. We weren't able to get all of the money back, but out of the $4.5 million that was cut, $4.4 million were cut, we were able to restore about $1.3 million, which is still, in the scope of things, not much at all. But it gave us a way to kind of galvanize around this issue and for our voices to be heard. So that's on a macro level. on the micro level, it's one of the things, like many of us, it's important for me to check in on our elders and check in on our peers and make sure that they're doing okay, and that they can, that if they need food or if they need help, or if they need help getting somewhere, or just to know that they're being seen and they're not forgotten and that we love them. That's all super important. And then on a spiritual, personal level, in that silence, it's also a good time for me to check in on a spiritual level. My relationship with God now is, I have more time for that, and more, the necessity is more, it's deeper, because often when we're serving and you know, when you're serving, and when I say serving, I mean it's in the largest sense of the word, where you're working and you're planning and you're moving quickly and you're trying to, you know, solve all of these big problems or small problems, or you're just trying to make it as an artist, just trying to get to the next gig, that sometimes the spiritual work, the internal work, is being neglected. So this is also an opportunity for me to have those quiet conversations with my Creator. Well, boy, am I grateful for that. And I say this without a sense of irony at all, to say my heart aches for people who don't have a relationship with something bigger than themselves. That this is really a time to find that. If you haven't found it, I encourage you. And when I say, I think of myself as having spirituality and a connection with a religion, but I would say that the connection with the religion, as much as I recommend it for myself, that's not the highest value. The highest value is a relationship with something bigger than yourself. I call it God. And I would encourage you to find that. If you don't find it, you're going to need it. You're going to need it. And we could talk about that for forever. So here I am now thinking about, you know, what are some of the things that we have to deal with as artists in trying to get our music heard. I'm thankful for Gail Boyd for this opportunity where we can talk about music, where she's providing platforms for music to be performed and for musicians to have their voice heard. You know, we're going to have to find new ways for music to be performed, and I think streaming is going to be a fantastic opportunity for us. I think as musicians, one of the things that will be required is for us to reinvestigate our responsibility, shared responsibility in making music happen. We're going to have to be more involved in the nitty-gritty and the nuts and bolts of it. And here's the cool thing. I think sometimes we've underestimated how equipped we are, how smart we are, how energetic we are, how capable we are of learning things to help move the music forward. And when I say move the music forward, I'm talking about the other things that help support the music, whether it's curating your own series, or, you know, being a band leader, or creating your own labels, or you know, taking on some of the administrative roles, or overseeing some of the marketing that's required. I think it's a unique opportunity because for many of us, the infrastructure that we had hoped for, we don't have access to. Especially, I have a concern for the younger musicians who, for many of them, that industry that they hope to be a part of when they dreamed about being a musician, it's not there anymore. There are few record labels. There are a few high-level managers like the Gail Boyds of the world, and there are a few agencies who may take you on. But the question is now, when you don't have that kind of infrastructure or that kind of expertise and those connections and that power structure to help you move your career forward, what do you do? You know, what do you do? So it's incumbent upon us to take on those roles that we weren't comfortable with, or to enroll people in our teams to take on some of those functions. I'm really grateful to my wife, Roxanne, who has a really shrewd business sense, especially around marketing. And and other folks around me that know some of the things that I don't know. But I think it's also incumbent upon musicians and creatives, no matter what the artistic sphere, to not be satisfied with what you don't know, right? It's a tricky balance, right? You don't have to be an expert, if in all these things. If I want someone to get into negotiating a contract, I'm going to turn to the Gail Boyds of the world, who, someone like her is not only has a deep understanding of what artists need and what record labels are looking for and what venues are looking for, but she's an attorney as well. If you have somebody on your team like that, tremendous. So all of these roles have to be taken on, and you don't have to wear all these hats, but all these roles have to be fulfilled. And now, as creatives, we at least have to have this kind of wide view of everything that's necessary for us to have a sustainable career and to be able to continue to be generative, to be able to create more music and to create a better kind of situation for the ones who are coming behind us. So that's probably what I would say most to young musicians, to now think more broadly about who you are outside of the practice room and what you want your music, how do you want your music to reach other folks who are going to benefit from it. And here's the one thing, I'll try to say this as articulately as I can. I think sometimes there's this misunderstanding of the dichotomy between art and business, or between music and business. And I think it's by design that we think of those things as opposing forces rather than being intricately linked, that they can be in the right environment, they can support one another. That folks who will help us, who have kind of a business experience and a business mindset, and those of us who are creative and innovative and who are artistic and nimble, that you need both. And I would love to see us move away, as many of you are already doing, move away from thinking about these things as opposing, but to see where they're connected and to lean into that and to take advantage of that. And that also means that the creative part of it, that part where you're writing this brilliant music, or you're performing, and you're soaring through your music, that has real value. And it's a value that is immeasurable in terms of the way Western society thinks about, just in terms of dollars and cents, that it has an intrinsic spiritual, psychological, social, emotional value. And because it has all of those things, that then it is worthy of investment too. So it all works together. Wow, what time is? I'm just talking and talking. I don't see anything in the chat, but maybe I'm not seeing it right. But if you have questions, I promise you I'll interact with you. The other thing I do want to talk a little bit about is just the subject of the social justice and racial justice reckoning that we're dealing with now in the United States. And I think it's important for us to verbalize that we're going to have difficult conversations, and that's okay. I think it's long overdue. One of the things that we were able to do in our Jazz Philadelphia Summit, our convening, was to encourage conversations around race, and encourage conversations also around gender and justice. Vijay Iyer and Steve Rowland, they were able to have a wonderful conversation with some real, some difficult moments about who gets to lead those conversations and who's viewed as being an expert, and what does privilege look like, and so on. This is probably not, I don't have the time to delve into this deeply, but the main takeaway I'll say is that now is the perfect time to have these kinds of conversations. We will only grow from them. We will only grow, as we always do, from confronting uncomfortable things head on. In fact, in every aspect of life, that's where all the growth is. So certainly with this society, so whether it comes to music, or whether it comes to business, or whether it comes to racial injustice, or any of the things, gender justice, any of the things we're uncomfortable with, be comfortable in being uncomfortable. And thank you.